Mic check, 1, 2.
All right, good evening, everyone. I now call to order the Tuesday, August 13th, 2024 meeting of the City of Sugar Land Planning and Zoning Commission. We will start with item 2, public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No one signed up.
All right, we'll move on to item 3A, consideration of and action on the minutes of the June 27th meeting. A link to the minutes was available in the meeting invite, and you can also view them on the attachments on your Novus agenda. I assume those have been reviewed. Do I hear a motion? All right. I've got a motion to approve the minutes from Commissioner Dawood, and I've got a second from Commissioner Smith. Any discussion? All right, please vote.
So the mouse is not working? Okay, thank you.
Move that item on the agenda.
Are you a yes?
Yes, I am.
That motion passes. Let's move on to item 4A, workshop, the review of and discussion on the city's strategic plan and redevelopment priority. Looks like we've got several speakers tonight. Ruth Lomer, Assistant Director of Community Planning and Redevelopment, Jessica Rodriguez, Interim Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services, and Shayla Lee, Director of Strategic and Governmental Affairs, in whatever order you all would prefer.
And we have one more that's not listed there that I'll introduce you to in just a minute. Just for fun, we added another one. Okay, so we are here tonight because we want to prepare you for continuing and upcoming work that we're going to be doing related to redevelopment. So you had a workshop last year where we talked about redevelopment. We're continuing our kind of community education on redevelopment, and the Planning and Zoning Commission in particular is going to be pivotal as we go forward in our work to redevelop the city. And so we are putting together a series of workshops that we're going to be bringing forward over the next couple of months. Tonight is workshop number 1, why redevelopment? And then some future workshops will address how land use decisions are financial decisions. We're going to talk about breaking down barriers to redevelopment, and then what to do with public input in a not in my backyard world. So tonight we are going to have a few of us that are going to rotate through the speakers podium. First up, we'll have Shayla Lee, who is our Director of Strategic and Governmental Affairs, who's going to talk about the City Manager's FY24 strategic plan. And then I'll be back up here with Jessica Hubble, who is, the two of us are both Assistant Directors in Community Planning and Redevelopment. And then Jessica Rodriguez is going to come up and talk a little bit about your role in redevelopment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shayla, and I will be back up in just a bit.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. Good evening. How are you guys tonight?
Perfect.
All right, so let's get started talking about the city's strategic plan for 2024. Okay, so I always like to put this background information slide up here just on the different audiences so we all are kind of on the same page. But you guys know Sugar Land is home to over 1,000 residents. On one of our latest satisfaction surveys, we found that 95% of our residents love calling Sugar Land home, and of that, 10% said that they would change nothing about the city that would make their lives any better. So with that, we want to continue to have this high satisfaction rate. We want to continue to be a community where people want to come to and thrive. And so with that, we're focused on being innovative, forward-thinking, and continuously obsessed with making the world better. And so the 2024 strategic plan is a reflection of our commitment to continue to evolve as a city. And so just kind of setting the stage of the different elements of the strategic plan, the first section has strategic outcome areas. And so those are 8 areas that our city council has set as a reflection of the community priorities. And so those reflect different focus areas that we make sure every single initiative, project that we embark on are tied back to those 8 outcome areas. They're in no particular order of importance. They're all equally important, but kind of wanted to walk you guys through what those are as we walk into the different elements of the plan. So number 1, our first strategic outcome area is finance strong and viable. So we recognize as being a leader in financial management, we want to continue to provide our taxpayer with exceptional value. So that means that we have to be innovative, efficient, and just continually find ways to be adaptable and making sure that we have exceptional financial management. Number 2, community safe and secure. So Sugar Land prides ourselves in being one of the safest cities in the nation. And so in order to continue to provide that quality of life, we do things like invest in our training, our fire, EMS, supporting our security of our infrastructures, and whether that be technology or physical infrastructures, and then also making sure our staff has the proper training and equipment to be able to respond to different emergency events. Number 3, economy thriving and vibrant. So Sugar Land is built off of this entrepreneurial spirit. And so we recognize that we must make investments today that are making us continue to thrive tomorrow. So making sure we have opportunities for this new innovators, having businesses and partnerships, and also partnering with our nonprofit community to make sure we have this constant cycle of giving back and mentoring and learning. Number 4. So we want to make sure that our community is fun, that people actually want to be here. They want to live here, they want to come visit here. And so with that, we focus on different performance venues, our different recreational activities, the different restaurants and hospitality environments that you can attend, as well as various celebration efforts. Number 5. So we recognize that things don't just stop at our doorstep. And so with that, we have to have partnerships across different levels of government. We have to have partnerships within different regional groups, our different communities, such as the school district and things of that nature. And so we focus on making sure that we are a leader and focusing on the different innovative leadership and just doing best practices when it comes to local government so that we can provide exceptional service to our community. Number 6, transportation connected and convenient. So we take a multifaceted approach of focusing on different innovation and mobility because we recognize that we have to connect people, places, and the future through different things like sustained investments, working with these partnerships because people cross over different roads, they cross into different jurisdictions, and so making sure we're using different technology for management, and as you guys will continue to talk about redevelopment, making sure we're planning for the mobility of that impact as well. And then also doing sustainable community engagement efforts to be able to get feedback on these different transportation things that will impact the community as well. Number 7, infrastructure, sustainable and resilient. So again, Sugar Land is committed to maintaining comprehensive, sustainable, resilient infrastructure, and that means focusing on the long-term planning efforts because we recognize we're not just building different things for today, but we also have to maintain it throughout the future. And so focusing on those collaborative approaches through partnerships and finance and also those outreach efforts so that we can continue to engage with our community on different things that impact them. Number 8, so not only do we want to have fun and make sure people want to come here, we also want to make sure these different diversity of opinions, perspectives, and demographics have spaces that are welcoming those diverse opinions. And so we are committed to creating those spaces that have those hard dialogues, that create those places that welcome all. So those are the 8 outcome areas. So again, those are kind of those goalposts that reflect community priorities. And so those are the 8 that City Council has set as a foundation for every single thing that we embark on. And so now kind of the path in which we achieve that is through our organizational vision and values. So with that, you'll probably hear this in a lot of the things and presentations that you see various staff do, because our vision as an organization is that we are trailblazers, relentless in our pursuit of good so that our employees, residents, and businesses can enjoy a life better than they can even imagine. And so we'll talk about a little bit about what trailblazing looks like for us in action. One of the kind of pathways that we want to make sure, you can say you be trailblazers, but how do you actually carry that out in your behaviors? And so for us, that's reflected in our values. So our values as an organization, as a community, as a city are reflected in Blaze. So being bold, encouraging each other, encouraging our community to have these bold ideas, embracing innovation, thinking outside the box, but understanding that we're gonna have to take risks sometime, but making sure we're mitigating that whenever possible. Loyal. Not only are we being loyal to each other, our work, our mission, our vision, but also understanding that we're gonna face successes and challenges, but as long as we do so together, we'll always come out on the other side. Adaptable. So recognizing that the world is gonna change, the environment's gonna change, we can control some of those things, a lot of those we can't, and so just making sure we're ready to be adaptable and flexible for those different things that come our way in the face of technology and evolving trends. Zealous. So you guys know Sugar Land is committed to providing the superior, top, excellent service as possible, and so just making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to continue to do that. And then the last one, so not only are we expecting people in our city and our staff to carry out exceptional value and provide great services, but we have to make sure we provide them with the necessary resources and tools to do so. And so Empowered is about making sure we create these opportunities and these realms for our community and our staff alike to be able to excel in their roles. And so I like to kind of just throw a little descriptors because trailblazing means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And so for our organization, being trailblazing is about being curious, exploring new ideas, creating efficiencies, taking risks, and understanding that we're sometimes gonna fail, but as long as we continue to evolve, learn from our mistakes, and get back up, that is what trailblazing looks like for us. And so with that, so we have the strategic outcome areas, those are the goalposts, we have the vision and values, our path to achieve it, and with that, we have to focus our efforts on very specific areas because if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so how we do that is in the form of all-in initiatives. And so we call those all-in initiatives because that means that every single portion of our staff has to find some way that they can connect back to these initiatives. You'll see specific departments kind of lead these, like much of Ruth and Jessica will talk about different redevelopment initiatives, and so they're kind of leading those charges, but all-in initiatives means that every single person has a role to play in it. And so just kind of highlighting, these are the titles of our 4 all-in initiatives. So commercial and residential redevelopment, you guys will hear a lot more about that, but just continuing to figure out how do we make sure we stay relevant and we continue to be a community that people want to come to and thrive in. The second one, data-driven decision-making. So we have a lot of data. We want to make sure we're utilizing it to the best of our ability. And so I did want to kind of show you guys just a quick screenshot, but this is available on our city website as well. But we do have an open data portal. It's called data.sugarlandtx.gov. And so on this website, anybody in the community is able to see different data sets, different departments are able to post kind of metrics and how we're making sure our city is investing in the data collection and making sure we're making the best decisions for our community. And so that's available and we're continuously updating that as well. The third one, prioritizing future capital investments. And so making sure we're using community surveys, other feedback, assessments, master planning, and making sure we figure out what are those next future capital investment projects that we should be focused on. And then the last one is more internally focused, but I do like to throw that out there just so you guys know that as we talk about the services that we're gonna provide for the community, we recognize that first we need to be able to invest in our staff so that they can be able to carry out those different things. So with that, just kind of a summary again of all the elements of it. Strategic outcome areas are those goalposts. The vision and values are the path to achieve it. The all-in initiatives are those priorities and efforts that we focus on. And the performance is how we hold ourselves accountable. And so the full strategic plan is available on the city's website under vision and values. And it also kind of talks about the different metrics that we'll be tracking these priorities against as well. And so with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Questions for Shayla?
I got a question for you. Thank you. It looks awesome. How do you measure this and when do you plan to? You talked about measuring it. Plan's a great plan, but what are your KPIs and how do you measure that?
So if you go to the open data portal, there is a connection that says Sugar Land performance, and that ties directly to the different all-in initiatives. And so some of the KPIs for, I'll say, like the data decision making, that one will focus on, okay, what are the top projects that have came out in the last year? What data has been impactful to that? What different data sets and inventories are we building within our community? How often are we updating different portal sites? And so those are kind of some of the measures there. And then we have for organizational culture, how many projects and training programs do we have for our staff? And so we're tracking all of that through the portal as well.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
All right, so with all of that as the backdrop, we're going to talk more specifically about redevelopment, which is one of those all-ins. It's the top priority of our city council. So as you probably know by now, a new department was created last year to focus on this redevelopment effort. So Jessica and I are the assistant directors. We're going to be sharing some information with you about redevelopment tonight, but we have a whole team that we work with that is focusing on this effort. So these are two teams that were brought together from two different departments previously. So you knew me in my old role in planning and development services, and then Jessica and her team worked in the economic development department, and so they are economic developers. We are planners that have been brought together to really bring together our brains, our resources to focus on this most top important priority. So our mission statement as a department is to advocate for and support development and redevelopment that will sustain strong community services and a thriving quality of life. We're doing this by focusing on a number of different areas, including redevelopment planning and strategy, obviously focusing on Imperial and Lake Point being those top priority areas. We also work on public-private partnerships, more of that data-driven decision-making, revitalization programs, financial tools and incentives, and land use policies. So we're gonna go through some slides. Some of this information may seem a little bit familiar, but I feel like it's helpful to hear things more than once. And so I want to talk a little bit about what is redevelopment and why does Sugar Land need to redevelop. So this is the life cycle of Sugar Land as a city. Every city has a life cycle. Every city kind of goes through this small town to some growth, kind of hit that growth peak. And then there's that point where we have to make a decision. So back in the 50s, 60s, and before that, we were that small town. And then we hit our rapid growth in kind of the 70s, 80s, 90s, where a lot of our big master plan communities were developed. Then we sort of hit that growth peak in the last 5 to 10 years where we're building out. We don't have a lot of places to go. And so now we can either go sort of the natural path, which is the path of decline, or we can be proactive and redevelop. And so the way that we do that is really influencing our economic development impact cycle. So this cycle is important to understand. It started here in Sugar Land with Imperial Sugar. So we started with those primary jobs. And then that creates a demand for housing. A lot of people will move to where their job is. And so that's what you saw here is where Imperial Sugar then started developing those houses, those neighborhoods for the people who are in those jobs. Then once people are here, then that creates a demand for retail, which you hear maybe a lot of times retail follows rooftops. So you have to have those, the people here in the houses to create the demand for the retail. And then through that, we create property taxes, sales tax, hot taxes that then can be invested into our quality of life amenities like parks and things like that, which then our quality of life, that's what draws people here. People come here for the jobs, for the quality of life, and so then that economic development impact cycle continues on. And so what we have seen in Sugar Land is we've done really well with our job growth. Over this 5-year period, we had about a 14% increase in our jobs. At the same time, we only had about 2% increase in our population. What we also see is that we have a very significant job base here in Sugar Land. We have a lot of people, almost 70,000 that come into the city to work, that come from kind of the surrounding area. And then about 40,000 people are leaving the city for their jobs. Only about 7,500 actually live and work here. Why is that? It's because we have places for people to work where those people can't necessarily live here. And the people who do live here are leaving to go to other jobs. And so why don't we have the housing? Well, as you probably know, you've probably heard us talk about this statistics. We only have about 4% of our land left that is undeveloped. That's a decrease from about 15% down to 4% in the last 15 years or so. And so there's really not many places left for us to develop new housing. We've seen our population kind of follow that path on the life cycle from the small town back in the 60s and 70s. You see where, 2,000, 3,000 people climbing all the way up to about 111,000 back in the 2020 census. But we're also seeing that level out. So in the last few years, the census data estimates that have come out actually show us declining in population. And that is a result of not having new housing being created. So we've seen a significant decrease in our suburban housing construction over the years. Back in about 15 years ago, we were at about 500 in a year. And last year, we only had 3. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question now, or do we wait till the end?
Well, you already just did.
I did, so. So my question is, go back one slide.
Yes, sir.
So we've gone from 111,000 to 108,000, so we've almost 3,000, 2,500. Is that empty housing now? Is that what that number is? I'm just curious.
And more than likely it is, I don't go to every house and ask people like how many people live here, but more than likely it is a result of fewer people per household.
Okay.
It's not necessarily an increase in vacancy, but more than likely it's that kind of leveling off of our number of people per household.
Thank you. I'll wait to the end next time.
So as I was saying, we used to have about 500 units per year that were built. And this past year in 2023, we only had 3 new suburban single-family homes built in the city. 3, that's it. In the coming years, we do anticipate a few more coming online because we do have a few areas that are going to develop. But it's really, on the whole, not a whole lot of homes that will be coming. So what does that mean for us as we are building out, as we are aging as a community? So our age continues to increase over time, and that has impacts on our city services. We love the fact that people have moved here, in the 90s and have stayed here because they love Sugar Land. But what that means is those kids that they moved here for aren't in schools anymore. And so we've seen a decrease in our elementary school utilization. It also means that we have fewer of our residents participating in our youth leagues. We see a decreasing spending per household. So people who are aging tend to spend less. People tend to spend a lot when they have kids in the house, as I'm sure a lot of you know. We have also seen the number of households with children decreasing. So about 34% of houses in Sugar Land had their own children in the home, whereas, as you may be familiar with the number, we have about 90% of our houses that are single family. So 90% of our homes are built for families, 34% of them have families or have houses with children. And so we need to kind of right size the variety of our housing to accommodate that. And then as Mr. Brown was mentioning that what's happening with the population there, well, it's that kind of leveling out of the persons per household. We don't see the 3 and 4, plus numbers per household as much. We're also seeing, in terms of city services, an increase in the response calls. An aging population means that more people are falling or, having issues that come along with aging. And then our senior center is also increasing in usage as a result of our aging population. Another part of being a community that is at that point in our life cycle is that our buildings and our homes are also aging, not just our people. So our median shopping center age is 23 years. I think 23 sounds kind of young, but for a strip center, that looks kind of old. So 62% of our retail space was actually built before 2000. And even more than that for our homes, because the homes came first and then the retail came later. It followed those rooftops. So the median age of our homes is 28 years, and over 70% of our homes were built before 2000. So what we have here is a place where people have moved, have come, have stayed, and they love it, but maybe they want to move into a smaller home, or maybe they want just a different kind of place that we don't necessarily have a place for people to go. So Jesse now is going to talk a little bit about how we are going to redevelop.
Hello, everyone. So in speaking of how are we going to redevelop, I think a main question is kind of the main goal is making the highest and best use of our land, right? And so what does that mean? You know, it's turning parking lots into better uses. And you'll see on the screen, this is a great example of that being done. On the left side, you'll see First Colony Mall. It was a sea of parking, and then the Lifestyle Center was added, which was about 25 businesses that has paid off dividends in the sales tax and property tax revenue that it's generated. So that's a perfect example of making the highest and best use of your land and reinvesting in spaces. We want to renovate and redevelop commercial to new commercial and other uses. Like Ruth said, our commercial is aging. And so what does that look like if it's kind of transformed and given a new life? Brand identity is really important to retailers. And so how can we assist with that? We need to maintain a balanced mix of land uses. We should never have more office, more industrial. We need to have a balance. A variety is key. And then looking at our infrastructure, we're aging. So our infrastructure is aging. We need to make sure that we're focusing on reinvesting in it where it makes sense, and so we get the best use out of it long term. And then working with the private developers and using private investment to help encourage this change. It's not something that the city can do or should do on its own. And then work to create more walkable spaces to get people moving around. And so, you know, what is a city? And I think to understand where you start, you have to understand the economics of a city and how it works. And so a city is basically your land, right? It's your acreage. It's a finite amount. We're not going to get any more. So how do we do the best with what we have? And so it was important for us to understand how our city is performing. And so we commissioned Urban 3, which you're going to get a much more deep dive of this information in the next workshop. But they basically look at tax revenues and tax values per acre. So instead of looking at your city as a whole, you look at it per acre to make sure that it's performing to the best way, the best possible. And then you measure it by that productivity. And so this data is geared to help us make informed decisions, right? Every land use decision is a financial decision. And so it helps us better arm our council and our boards when we're asking them to make a determination of that full picture. Because when you build something, it's built, right? And so another way to look at it with land production, an analogy that they use is a farmer. Like a farmer looks at their land of, you know, yielding the crops, like crops per acre, water per acre, labor per acre. And so again, it's just looking at it at its productivity, at its economics. You're not gonna, you know, farm everything, but you're gonna look to see what is the highest and best use and what makes the most sense for your area. Another good comparison is, you know, we don't look at cars as miles per tank. If we did, we would all drive these big trucks, but that's not productive, right? So we look at them miles per gallon, and when you look at them in this lens, it changes the way that you should be buying your car. And like I said before, we all should be driving this BMW Isetta, which I don't know what that is. I don't know if you guys know what it is, but it is the best miles per gallon, right? So it's just how you look at something, as opposed to looking at it holistically. You look at it at a deeper, more closer level at the value per acre, or in this case, miles per gallon. Again, tying the planning and economic development, you know, this really spoke to me when I saw this comparison. When you look at a Costco, Walmart, your big box retailer versus a strip center, if you look at just the land consumed, you've got 40 acres for a big box on average versus 0.75 for acres. If you look at the sales tax revenue alone, clearly your big box is going to outperform it, right? 1.5 million versus 135,000. But if you look at it on sales tax revenue per acre, your big box is producing at 38,000 and your strip center is producing at 180,000. So you're getting more value out of that strip center than you are of this huge big box that's taking up 40 acres, a parking lot. A lot of it is not revenue generating. And so same thing with property tax. You're getting 2,000 per acre versus 44,000 per acre. So it's looking at the areas in our city that make sense for the denser developments and realizing that that land use decision is a financial decision, and how are we getting that highest and best use where it makes the most sense. So here's a snippet of Sugar Land. This again was from Urban 3. This actually shows the taxable value per acre here in Sugar Land. As you can see, Sugar Land Town Square office outpaces everybody, and the retail. The First Colony Mall is part of that purple. But it makes sense, right? This is our densest area. This is where all the value is being created. Texas Instruments is high up there, and then a pharmaceutical company over in the business park. But what this illustrates is the places where you see the higher purple and the higher productivity, that's offsetting the cost for your lower density areas. So it's important that we continue to invest and put money and redevelop in those areas that are the high producing, because that's what helps sustain your services long term. And so here's an actual, when you look at it, you know, how it actually impacts the general fund is funded by sales tax, property tax. And so here's an actual snippet from our budget workshop that took place last week. And you'll see in the 5-year forecast, our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. We're an older city. We are not bringing in much more new revenue in terms of housing or development. So what does this mean for us, right? We have to make intentional decisions about how we're going to move forward. We have to find efficiencies. We've got to make sure that we are developing and putting resources where it counts. And so when you talk about expenditures,
Are you taking questions now, or
yes.
do you want them held to the end?
We can take it now, that's fine.
Yeah, so my question, go back one slide for me, is you're
This one?
looking at the highest and best use where you're
Yes.
getting the big, not only do you have to put your money there, but you have to grow that footprint, right?
You have to grow it, yes.
So that, are you going to address that, or is that?
Well, I think it's just
Because
part
you
of.
can't look at it in a silo, excuse me.
No, you definitely can't. And I think the key here, and again, I'll go into it a lot more next week or the next session too. But yeah, you definitely want to look where your purple is and grow it. So when we say, take this area, for example, the mall is right up there as a high performer. How do we further enhance this?
And that's what you did with the addition of the.
The
whatever you wanna
lifestyle
call it.
center, yeah, exactly. And so how do we make this more walkable? How do we work with these property owners to transform some of the parking lots that may not be as needed into better uses? Again, putting your investment into where it's already happening and working, that's the goal, is that you further strengthen these areas of purple.
Thank you.
I have a follow-on questions. I was writing my questions down.
Yeah.
But mine, I had one sort of along those lines in this same area. So in the town square office space, obviously that pulls in, you know, a lot of taxable value.
Yep.
But what is the experience right now with people moving out because it is too expensive to have there, and actually moving maybe even out of Sugar Land or on the outsides of Sugar Land? Because I know of 2 businesses that, you know, I went to, and they're not in that area anymore.
Do you mean office or retail, or both?
It was office.
Office. Well, I mean, I think office is hard right now. I mean, it's definitely a volatile market, to say the least. We're actually doing really well in Sugar Land compared to the industry, and we will continue to see people come and go, you know, but the goal is, again, reinvesting in this area to attract people here. A lot of what brings people to the mixed use office environment is the retail that it has, the parks and placemaking. And so while business development side really does focus on how to retain, I think we're really focused on those intentional investments and changes that we can try to make now to attract what's coming in the future. How do we set our city up now for what's coming in 20, 30, 40 years? Because when something's built, it's built, right? We're not going to bulldoze stuff. And so we're trying to focus on what we need to do now to make this more attracting, to keep bringing that interest here. And so it's a balance. We're always going to lose, though.
Since this organization was built, does that mean now you're actively pursuing businesses to come in and sort of showcase areas to get them to come in to potentially like this space?
So in economic development, the economic development department, there's a whole division on business retention and attraction, and they do that actively. Yep. So we kind of talk about ourselves as like, we're trying to build the development, like get the development off and going. And then the eco-dev, the business attraction and attention, they need to fill it. So we need to create the spaces that people want to come and reinvest and get the places off the ground, and then it's their job to fill it. But we work together. We share an office, so we definitely talk.
I just want one more question, since you were talking about the taxes per acre. When you do that, and you do that a calculation across Sugar Land, I know Sugar Land has a lot of parks, and it's probably a higher percentage of parks than most cities. Would that then have a negative impact on parks? Because I don't think we get a lot of taxes on
No,
parks.
and he'll talk about that in the presentation you see from Urban 3. There's no, because we asked that question too.
Yeah.
Is there a balance we should have between non-taxable land versus taxable land? And there's really not. It's what's right for your city. I mean, our city prides itself on our parks. We put a lot of investment into our parks, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, nothing was done wrong there. It's just in the areas that you have the opportunity is making it count and making intentional decisions to make sure that you're getting the value in those other places so you can maintain those parks and those services that you're offering your residents. So no, having the amount of parks that we have, it's not a bad thing, not at all.
Thanks.
But if there's ever an opportunity at a park, because you see parks now, they're getting, some are adding food and bev services, some are adding other amenities. Again, it's when those opportunities come to the table, it's evaluating them. Like, does it make sense for your city? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it's trying to make us look at a different lens, right? What is the highest and best use? What's the right decision for our city?
Jessica, I have a
Yeah.
question. The thing that I have a hard time wrapping my mind around is we always refer to town center and the mall as you know, kind of a shining example of things that we should strive for. But don't we reach not all developments can be this, right? And so I'm curious, like, how should we be thinking about maybe saturation or getting more, I mean, by this account, looks like we need more pharma and self-storage, right? Like, and so like workhorses versus
Yeah.
show horses, and,
Yeah.
and then back to the previous, it's like, not everything can be shiny,
100%.
right? And so, I know you're probably gonna say it needs to be a balance, and that all makes sense, but when you have something like this outperforming everything else, how much of the thinking is trying to recreate something that clearly outperforms everything else? And is that thinking warranted, considering that not everything can be what we have here?
Yeah,
So
no, and I think that's a fair
lot there,
question.
but-
I think that's a fair question, and I think it's something that we talk about a lot. When I continue to go through, you'll see, you know, the key areas, right, are Imperial, Lake Point, and then the prison site, the Century Unit. We own that land. I think we all know that we don't need 3 town squares by any means. They all need to have their own identity. They all need to be able to perform on their own. And so that's, I hate to use the word balance, but that's kind of the balance that we have to have in those discussions when they're being visioned out with a developer, when we're at the table, is there is going to be some competition, there's no doubt about that. But like Lake Point, for example, it should be much higher, more likely on the residential side than the commercial side. It should not be a replica of this. It should have its own identity and be able to stand on its own. But I think that's a valid question. Even the land use plan, which you guys are very familiar with, calls out, was it 5 racks? So yeah, do we need 5 mixed-use town squares? I think all of us would sit up here and say no, but what is the identity that they all need to have? I mean, I think that's what we have to figure out and do it the right way. But I mean, I think you're asking the right question. I mean, it's a great question. We don't want to take away from this. We want to keep investing in it, but we can accommodate more in other areas in our city if it's done the right way. So when we talk about expenditures starting to outpace revenues, that's where we have to look at trade-offs, right? So you can't have stable services and low taxes without more density, right? You can't have low taxes and low density and not have service cuts. And stable services with low density, you might see higher taxes, right? So again, making intentional decisions now about how we increase these revenues to right-size our revenues and expenditures will help with these trade-off discussions and where we're willing to give. And then I joked earlier, you know, the stable services, low taxes, low density, it doesn't exist, right? That's the Truman Show that we all want to live in, but we have to, you know, something's got to give. And so again, just looking at this monetarily, this is another snippet of a budget impact. So you see the revenues, about 103 million, 110 million on the expenditures, so it's outpacing. If you take these 3 target areas in our city, so Century Unit, which is the prison site, and just for anybody who may not know, this was originally purchased by the city with the thought being an extension of the business park. Our business park is at capacity, so the thought here is that this would be an extension of that. And then the Lake Point redevelopment, which you're very familiar with, is same as Imperial. So we asked Urban 3 to forecast this out to highest and best use. And so they look at areas around the country and do their math. And by influencing 2% of our land, you make up a $10 million deficit in sales tax and revenue. And so you plug that back into our budget and you're starting to chip away at that balance. So again, where are the places in our city that it makes the most sense to build the density and to build that value to help bring that revenue back in, which is what we need. Because if we don't, we're not attracting more people, right? And so that's sales tax, that's property tax. So we have to think of different ways to go about doing this in the right way. And so some other major projects and focus areas, like I said, we're working on Imperial, Lake Point, but also something that you guys would likely see or hear about in the future, hopefully, are small area plans. So taking Imperial, for example, that was a master plan community. People bought into that community. It's changed a lot over the years. Ownership has changed. But with a small area plan, we can actually initiate engagement with the local, like the current residents. What do they want to see there? What does that area, how is it going to best serve them and actually bring them to the table? And it looks at mobility and a lot of different facets, and then that can be tied into the land use plan and comprehensive plan. But it would still, these plans would focus on those regional activity centers and the neighborhood ones that were called out in the land use plan, but give a more closer look, a more detailed look, and actually work with the community to do so. And then for those of you who may not be aware, we have the Great Homes program. This is the residential reinvestment program. We're closing out year 2 here, but we've seen a lot of great feedback with this. Again, our housing is older, a lot of single family homes, where we have a lot of competition with Richmond and Rosenberg and Fulshire. And so what's gonna make somebody choose Sugar Land when they can go buy a different, a newer house somewhere else? And so this was our attempt to try to encourage residential reinvestment. And again, we want to come in and support, but we can't fund everything, right? We're always looking for that private investment, and then we can supplement in the way that we can. So we've seen over 145 exterior home renovations, which is about 2.3 million worth of improvements. So that's a great ROI on what we're actually putting in. And so the one on the left, or I'm sorry, the right, that's a house in Mayfield. She never had a driveway. She's lived here her whole life. It was like 50 years, never had a driveway. And so with this program, she was able to do that. And so we've seen really amazing stories come through, and we're tracking it all with data, because Shayla requires it of us. And it shows, patterns, right? You'll see if one house gets it, likely their neighbor or people across the street, you'll see pockets start to form, because there's jealousy, right? Like, your house is pretty, like, I want to make mine look nice. And so that's the hope, right? There's a ripple effect that we want to see. And so we give back either 10% or 25% reimbursement based off the age of your home. And then some other success stories that you may not be aware of, because we look at our city every day. Town Square is a great example of reinvestment. It's 20 plus years old. It's had a great run. It's seen a great life, but it's older, right? And so the new ownership group has put a lot of money into refacing it. They've upgraded the landscaping, bringing it down to pedestrian scale, adding shading. BB Italia, if you haven't eaten there, I highly encourage you do so. They were attracted here because of some other tenants that we had, and because of the facade improvements that have been allowed in Town Square. And within their first year, they actually expanded to the space next to them and created a little bar, like banquet type area. And they've actually already signed a lease to open another restaurant on property in the coming years. And then Zoe's Kitchen was doing a nationwide closing. They transitioned to Cava, and we were able to save them because, again, of the retail positioning, the facade improvements, and just all that was going on here. And that's just a few examples. There's a lot that's happened around here. Another program that we facilitate out of our office is called Fostering Unique Neighborhoods, the Fund Grant program. It partners with community neighborhood groups to encourage placemaking improvements in their community, just, again, trying to get reinvestment. It brings that value back to that community, creates a place of home, and just kind of really hones in on that community spirit. And so this is Highlands. This was actually a pool that was filled in with cement. It had just been sitting there. And so through this program, they turned it into a seating area with a playground, and they've seen a lot of traction through here. This is Sugar Creek. They have no sidewalks, so they added this little walkway down one of their medians, and because their residents have loved it so much, they're considering adding more. And then this is one of the business park signage at Sugar Creek Center. They'd had the same signage for decades. And so through this program, they were able to update all their signage, which they were very excited about. And then through the 4B Corporation, which is one that we oversee, we do a lot of parks and placemaking improvements. So as you guys probably know, we own the baseball stadium that was funded through 4B. We did parklets during COVID time. Rapport was actually a facade improvement that was done through COVID. They doubled down, made a huge investment into their facade and internally, and we were able to contribute to some of that. The pump track out the festival site, this is just to name a few. And with that, I'll take any more questions that you may have. Yes.
Going back to, you were showing the parks, or where you had gone into the Highlands and done
Oh,
something with the
yeah.
park. Are you doing any kind of partnering with like First Colony Community Services on some of their properties as well?
Yep. Yeah, so basically applications open in October. We've had the program for over 10 years. It was called Joint CIP for a while, but nobody knows what that is. So we changed the name to try to encourage people to participate. But yeah, we approved, I think it was 7 projects this last year, ranging from like Commonwealth, First Colony. Yeah, we do active outreach for these groups to try to get them to participate. And they can get up to a $75,000 match. So it's really impactful if they bring a really good project. And the projects are approved by the 4B Corporation Board. Anybody else?
Yeah, we may get to this, so feel free to defer, but what about incentives? And I know like the homeowner incentive, so not that, but big dollar incentives. Are we going to get to that, or do you want to talk about that now and the role that they play in redevelopment?
I mean, we can talk about that. I guess, depending on your question, I mean, we have different financing mechanisms set up, right? So here is Town Square as a TERS, so tax increment reinvestment, though, and that was a big piece. I don't know if Devin was looking at me to come up here. Same with Imperial, there's a TERS that helps with the financing. It's a reimbursement on infrastructure. And then TERS 4 is located around the Smart Financial Center area, Telfair area. Same concept. Additionally, through the 4A and 4B Corporation, we can do incentives as far as infrastructure, but it's tricky. Like 4A, it has to be tied to a primary job. They have kind of set incentives that they go off of. 4B, we can incentivize, parkland, placemaking, everything 4A can do, but a little different. But likely when it comes to these the big redevelopment projects, where you're going to see our incentives come in are through the infrastructure, the things that are going to remain with the city, really make the impact. And we typically do that by way of reimbursement. So there's performance agreements tied to it. But the financing pieces for these projects are the critical part. That's the hard part, right? And so we are lucky here in Texas to have the tools of 4A and 4B, because without them, it would make redevelopment a lot harder. Because even though we do have them, they're not really set up for redevelopment. Like you have to be very creative on how you can and can't use it. So like we're working on a commercial facade program potentially, and it's tricky because we can fund infrastructure, but like we can't go into a building and fund like them gutting a restaurant and remaking it. So there's limitations, but we do have a lot that we can do, and we're trying to figure out the best way to use our corporation funding, again, to help create that sales tax and revenue and property tax revenue that's going to further support our general fund.
Does the 4A get involved in project financing?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And are the tools inside of 4A today what are needed to make the economics of some of these larger projects actually go?
Yeah, I think between 4A and 4B, we're lucky to have.
Are
to
there
have those
tools
set
that
up.
you wish you had that you don't today?
Devin will chime in on that. I bet she's got some tools. Texas just, like, not a lot of places in Texas have really had to do real redevelopment yet, right? Like, we don't have blight here. And so our 4A and 4B corporations are very limited on what they can and cannot do, is regulated by the state. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty that Devin would love to have.
I think that there's two ways of that answer. There's either like, do we have the financial capacity, like the funding in the corporations? The answer is absolutely yes. We have the financial capacity in the 4A and the 4B corporation for current expenditures and future expenditures. From a legal standpoint, kind of more what Jessica was talking about is that it's not like 4A and 4B corporations aren't necessarily with the goal of redevelopment in mind. The goal is job creation and infrastructure for that. So it's how do these projects support in that way in job creation or infrastructure. You know, tax increment financing is a little bit more open in terms of it's what you put in that project plan. But I would say from my experience, you know, in Texas, redevelopment is somewhat of a newer thing, except for like in the major metropolitan areas, because so much of Texas is still very new. And so any of the more like urban renewal type programs would usually come through like a community development block grant funding or something like that. And Sugar Land, because of our incomes, we don't qualify for that type of funding. So it's really kind of fitting it. It's not like a very straightforward, but I would also say that I think that there's a lot of tools that Texas has on the books that maybe we haven't fully explored or utilized yet, and that's some of the research and process that we're doing right now, because
Do you already have any example of that?
Like today we were looking at, there's municipal management districts and there's municipal development districts, so there could be other types of districts or different parts of the Texas code that maybe would be a better fit specifically for redevelopment.
So what tools do you wish you had that you don't have?
I think it's probably in some of those ones that I don't quite know about yet. I would also say that there's, when it comes to our TERSs, you know, TERS 1 is pretty much done. TERS 3 is very structured in what it can be used for because of the agreements that we committed to in terms of development agreements and stuff like that. TERS 4 is one of those opportunities where could there be a more structured incentive policy that is created in order to incentivize the type of development you want to encourage that's beyond the project plan. There are other areas that create incentive policy specific for their TERS that because maybe they specifically want to encourage a certain type of form development, and that's how you know you're eligible for that funding.
And is it accurate to think, I mean, we have to be careful with the TERS though, right? Because don't the dollars have to stay in the district?
Yes, it would have to be within, it has to be within those boundaries. That's why like TERS 4, it's not a redevelopment example, but in terms of like future development and incentive tools, that's why I kind of give that example.
I mean, but that comes with, like developing by TERS is not a good plan. Because you lock up those dollars in that particular area, and if they're needed in other parts of the city, then you're constrained, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, we don't need to talk about TERS, but I'm just curious. I mean, your answers, I think it's important part of the discussion is the incentive piece that, you know, likely the city's probably gonna have to get more aggressive on. It sounds like you guys are doing the exploration and figuring out what tools are available. At some point, though, the plussing up the way in which we approach project financing and being willing to get directly involved is, which I know we do through 4A, but anyway, it's just it's a very tricky discussion, and I suspect one that we're going to have as a community pretty quickly.
Anybody else?
Yeah, on the Sugar Creek
Yes.
walking paths, can you talk about who all was involved in that?
The POA or the HOA, I don't know the specific names. Robin, I believe, is our main contact. And then-
No. I mean, but it's a partner, I assume it's a partnership basically between like the HOA and the city.
HOA and city, yep. And then when they bring a project forward, like say, for example, that one, like we basically work with them on the project. Like they'll bring an idea forward and then we'll, on the staff side, before they actually submit, we'll bring like engineering to the table, mobility to the table. How does this actually work? And then we take it to the board for full approval. So yeah, it's vetted through our team and then other city staff. So like another example is, I think it was First Colony, they added bike lanes. That was a big project between like mobility. It aligned with the mobility master plan. Like it checked a bunch of boxes. Because that's the goal of the program, is that it helps with mobility, placemaking, adds value to the community. Like there's these certain boxes that it needs to check because it's all in an effort to generate economic activity, make people want to live in your city. That's the overall goal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No? All right. Thank y'all.
Our unscheduled speaker.
Gosh, hi, I'm Jessica. Can you see me? I am with
Cannot.
with heels.
Wait a minute.
With heels.
Can't say.
It's okay. This has been my life since I'm like 12, so it's okay. It's when I stopped growing. So hi, I'm Jessica. Good to see you this evening, Commission. So I'm here to just bring in, the rear of the whole talk on redevelopment. There are, quite a few things in the last 2 years through 2023 and this year, the early part of 2024, that you've already been going through these items for redevelopment. One of the first things that you went through with these incremental changes is the alcohol overlay zoning district. That is with First Colony Mall, and that Jessica Hubble mentioned as part of that lifestyle redevelopment. That enabled us to have Little Woodrow's come here. And in the month between July 1st and August 1st, they had approximately over 22,000 visitors from that data. So that's the impact that we're talking about with those dollars that Jessica was talking about. We also have the Imperial Historic District. These were modifications that were made to add some multifamily units. It increased that number, and it all tied back to the Imperial Regional Activity Center that's tied to our land use plan. And those regional activity centers are what we refer to as, you've talked about before, the RACs. We talk about the Pearl at Lake Point, and while the Pearl is a green field, it's not necessarily redevelopment. It was part of Lake Point overall and those regional activity centers and tying it back where we added those additional multifamily units to enhance that Lake Point area. Then speaking of the Lake Point area, you were part of that process for the mixed use code for the Lake Point redevelopment district. This is the floor site. With this mixed use code, we obviously put in a lot of residential, some commercial uses. It was specifically with the residential for the middle housing, what you've often heard about, the housing that Ruth alluded to in her presentation and Jessica talked about also. We also had a lot of that connectivity with the pedestrian realms that were added in there. Other incremental changes that you've seen before you was just standardizing our conditional use permits, so CUPs. That was data-driven decisions by looking through the last few years and years of compiled data of what were the things that were still coming up as conditions. If we always have the same conditions for some of these CUPs, why don't we standardize this? And with your help, we were able to do that. We've aligned some stuff with the development code, with our code of ordinances, with no smoking, with the tobacco and the hookahs, and then also the EV charging stations. We have a building permit currently right now for a standalone EV charging station, so that's a product from that amendment that we had. Recently, the most recent amendments that you've looked at were for the Lake Point redevelopment district. We brought some revisions to you. We realized from adopting that original zoning district that there were some things that maybe didn't align when we put pen to paper. We listened to some developers in the community, and from there we were able to make some recommendations that made sense for Lake Point. You'll be seeing some things coming up again that are referenced towards Lake Point as we continue to further put pen to paper that this is really going to be a shining example of a redevelopment district. You also made recommendation for allowance for wine bars that are permitted in B1, B2, and Lake Point redevelopment district. And from that, we now have the Imperial Wine that's located in Sugar Land, where they're able to serve wine by the glass. So it's a good thing. Your role, planning and zoning's role in this, you're going to be seeing a lot of staff-initiated code amendments that we will be bringing to you. We probably have things spread out probably for at least the next 3 years that we can bring to you based off of recommendations from our land use plan, and then those from staff's recommendations as we go through plan review and we see things that maybe aren't conducive for redevelopment. We're going to be bringing workshops to you. We're going to talk through these redevelopment as we're talking it through right now, since it's a priority. We also want to know, what do you think? What are your ideas? Yes, staff is going to bring some recommendations to you, but we want your input, and not even just your input. We want your ideas. If you have something, if there's something that you need to point out to us, we want to hear that, because you're our support and our guide through our redevelopment efforts. And then community engagement. We realize there's a lot of community engagement as we're going through these processes and amendments that we're going to bring to you. We want you along part of that process that's maybe outside of a public hearing and going to a meeting within a community. What's next? The incremental changes that we talked about, our focus of the regulations and that work against redevelopment and promote things like Little Woodrow's. The phases that I spoke about, those are all focused on redevelopment, things that come from our land use plan, or just things that through trial, when putting the regulations down through plan review, that we notice are issues. Some of the recent things that you'll see that we'll be bringing before you, it's gonna have to deal with parking, our landscaping regulations, and then other like redevelopment site constraints that we see in our code. So expect more upcoming workshops, possible field visits, and then some charrettes that we may have within the community or have with you as we focus on redevelopment. Your next workshop is going to be on August 22nd. We are going to look at some land use decisions and those financial decisions that go with that, and that's going to be in the Kane room for your next meeting, so we can have something a little bit less formal. Any questions?
Yes. Can you
Yes,
go
sir.
back to your first slide or second slide? I think I can use that as, yeah.
Yes, sir.
No, not that one. That one. Thank you. Just using this as an example. So when we approve something, and I know it goes from us, it goes to city council, but let's say something like the Pearl gets approved, okay? What is the best way that someone in the public or an interested commissioner could check in on the status of that?
To learn what the action is with the city council?
No.
Is that the question? I'm sorry.
No, on something that's approved. If someone knows, okay, P&Z approved Pearl Lake Point on this such and such date, city council approved it.
So yes, I understand your
It's
question.
like a
now.
year later, and someone says, what's going on with the Pearl at Lake Point?
Gotcha.
What is the best way for someone to check in to see the status of that? And I'm using that as an example. I could do the same thing with lots of other things that have been in front of us and ultimately approved as well. Is there a place that people can go to kind of see a timeline of approved projects, I'm going to use that word,
Yes.
to see where they are in the development stage currently?
So thank you for asking that question. It's really great. You can go to the city's website and through either community planning and redevelopment site or the development planning site, which is, I think, just planning on the website. We have lists of ordinances that approve this if you really want to get in, I'm so sorry, I can't see, on the technical aspect of it. We also have some pages, I believe, that live with community planning and redevelopment that give you updates. For example, like the Imperial Historic Project that we were talking about, where we are. Sometimes we won't have an update for a while just because we haven't gotten anything for a while. So we have updates there. Secondly, you can always email us or you can call us and we can give you that information back. You can call us directly at planning. You can email us directly at planning. That's planning@sugarlandtx.gov. Or you can submit a 311 ticket and we can get that. The last thing is we are working on a project with GIS because we have some of our GIS in-house now. And that's one of the things that we're planning on doing is to have basically like a dashboard or a map that you could click on something and all the information is going to be available to you from that parcel. It's in the works.
That'd be helpful because we get questions from time to time, and I'm sure you all do, you know, like, hey, what's going on with the old Imperial Sugar offices on Brooks and 90, right? Or what's going on with the Pearl at Lake Point, or what's going on anywhere in Imperial. I just think it would be helpful for people to know where to go for that kind of stuff. And not just, I know people can read the minutes and they can see what's been approved. And I guess if I'm hearing part of your answer correctly, they can go see, you know, where certain aspects of permitting and things like that are. It just occurs to me that having something like that would be helpful. And in connection with that, you know, when we I know when we approve something, it's, you know, unless it's a plat, I mean, I know it's advisory, and I understand that stuff goes to places after, it goes to council after us and all that. But when something gets, you know, finally approved, it would be, or sometime during that process, it would be really helpful, I think, to think of a timeline, to think in terms of timelines. Like, you're being asked to do this, this is going to allow this to, something else to happen, and we project that'll happen in a year, or in 5 years, or in 10 years. I just think that kind of perspective helps, and I think it would help set expectations too, as far as when stuff's actually going to happen.
I think that's a great suggestion on trying to project some timelines. Maybe if we don't have it, I agree with you. Things get recommended here and then they get approved at council. And we know on the development side that those things can take years before you actually see something on the ground. And if you're just, you know, somebody out in the public and you don't realize that, you're like, what happened? I thought we were getting this great thing. I mean, heck, I do it where I live. Like, oh, we're supposed to get this great thing, and I know. So, like, what's going on behind the scenes? But I'm like, oh, it took like 10 years.
Right, and like at the State of the City address last year, I mean, we know stuff's happening, right? It may not be able to see it just when you drive by a particular property, but you know stuff is happening. So I think, you know, doing something to keep people informed of where these things are in their life stages would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
I have a comment and a question. One, I agree with Matt, and I think the other way to think about the points that you were making are that we're going to have to bring along the public, right? And the more information that can be shared in a consumable way, one, gets people excited, but more to the point, keeps them informed, and I think that's really beneficial. My question is, can you advance to maybe the next slide? One more. So I'm curious here. We know what the commission's role was in what I'll call the PD era, right? Like where we were developed through plan development agreements that we weighed in on where the ingress and egress was going to be, and you know, all of the things, right? Landscape plans and lighting plans and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious. That type of work is not articulated here on this slide. Can you give us a sense of, from a formal, I'll say, project standpoint, what is the role of the commission in this redevelopment era?
So I think the goal is not maybe necessarily getting into specific, like explicit, like details, like if we're looking at maybe like facades or like locations of dumpsters, but going more of like a 20,000 like view of what it is. Of course, you want to look at things like access and such, and you want to ensure that, you know, we've got like density and those sorts of things, but asking those questions that you heard, you know, here from Jessica about, are those the highest and best uses of it when we're looking at land use? Are we being smart about the green space? Are we being smart about the connectivity? Those are the questions that you need to ask when something's coming before you. I know y'all have a really great trust in staff, and what we're bringing to you is great, but having this conversation back and forth with you is how something is just like superb. You know, it only gets better with more input that we put in it. But I think those are the types of things that we would be looking for you to get feedback on. And, you know, and if you've got to push back on us because we're not thinking bold enough, you can push back on us that we're not being bold enough on those things.
So does that manifest in a formal process? Does it just show up in a dialogue, something like this, or is it, you know, does it show up in minutes of meetings and all that kind of stuff? I'm just curious, like, you know, there's sort of, I get the like almost advice and consent type role, but you know, anyway, I'd be curious. Lisa, you obviously have something to add.
Just a thought. I mean, I think we've mentioned that we're going to be bringing code amendments forward, and I think there's an opportunity there. One of the things we've explored in the past was, you know, the mixed use zoning district that would potentially be applied to a lot of different areas of the city, or areas where it makes sense, namely the activity center areas. You know, we took a different path and focused more specifically on Lake Point and creating a district for that area. But I think maybe, you know, as we look at some of the other areas, whether it's creating specialized districts, mixed-use districts for those areas, or we revisit kind of the concept of having a standard mixed-use district, that is, I think, an opportunity where we are putting all of those regulations, we're putting those in the standards, and that way they can be applied when projects do come forward. So I think that's where we would be looking to your guidance, to your expertise, to your visionary thoughts on how those standards can be the best that they can be to guide development in those areas.
Would it be fair to characterize this discussion as the commission very much moving away from specific project orientation and input toward more of a visioning body?
Potentially. I think there's still opportunities where there may be very specific things that you will be asked to weigh in on. Just like with the Lake Point redevelopment district, there is I think we called it a concept plan, help me. Okay, yes, concept plan, so that is specific to that area. Whether that is something that is utilized in other activity centers or just other types of applications is to be determined, I think. But that is an example, you know, where we would focus in on a specific area. Frankly, we still have PDs. PDs are still an opportunity or an option within the development code, but probably over time we will be pulling back in terms of how many times that type of zoning district is applied and used.
I'll ask you to do your best developer impression. Does that make the city more attractive to developers from the standpoint of, you know, you're not going to come before the commission and end up with, you know, an extra X number of dollars worth of you know, masonry around a dumpster, right? So something like that.
Yeah.
Is that, I'm curious if that's like, obviously this is all intentional, but is it to kind of put the open for business sign on the city after decades of us having a reputation, whether fair or not, as being onerous to develop in? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're obviously in a different stage in our life cycle, so that has to be taken into consideration. And I think something, you know, that we've heard with engaging with the development community, and we will continue to do that as we go through code amendments and so forth, or as other projects come forward, obviously. Time is money to them, to everybody, honestly, but to them, they were very clear about that. And so to the degree that they can have those standards up front, they know the playbook, so to speak. They have a clear understanding of the type of development, the quality of development that this city is demanding and looking for. They know that up front. They can decide whether or not they can meet that expectation, or if not, maybe this isn't the place for them to develop. And we get the best quality in the end. So yeah, definitely something to put out there, to tout, and that we are trying our best to make sure that we're sustainable for the long term.
All right, I will stop there, but I'll probably have some more questions.
No, great questions. No, appreciate it. This is the purpose of the workshop.
Yeah, so along those lines, I was also thinking, so we, you know, we're very much involved in the development of the development of the Lake Point redevelopment zoning district and the requirements. And my thought was, because I know we switched from this now to going to the different areas, that the commission would then be involved in looking how this was applied and sort of learning from that. So there might be pitfalls, you know, things that didn't work or things that worked really well. And that part of our role would then be, as we go to another area where we would be looking to potentially put, you know, another mixed-use zoning, you know, district in place, that then we would be involved in that.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct, because that would be something that, again, would be documented, housed in the development code. And so, yes, you have a direct role in reviewing, making recommendations on to city council. So,
Yeah.
yes.
So from that standpoint, and it goes along with, getting information on something that's been approved, it's almost, it's not like, I think that, for me anyway, from a commissioner standpoint, yeah, it's great to go out and get the updates, from what you're describing to the public, but I think as we go forward, it would be good to get, sort of the underlying, this really didn't, something that you wouldn't really communicate out on the broadband, the true learnings,
Yeah.
so that we can then approve as we go forward.
Absolutely, and I think we're already doing that, and
Yeah.
so we're definitely open to that. I mean, you've already seen us bring forward amendments to the Lake Point redevelopment district, in pretty short order after it was
Yeah.
approved. And we're ready, I think, identifying some additional things that will probably need to be tweaked and refined. And it's all with the attempt of just trying to be as clear, as transparent, as straightforward, and again, having those standards in place that are yielding the type of development that we want.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I think that was it. Yeah, we were done.
You have more, but that's it for city staff on that. Nothing? Any other questions for any staff on that? Thank you all for your presentations. They're very informative and helpful to this committee, and thank you for all the work that went into them and preparing them. Some of that stuff we've seen before and some of it's new to us, but I think it's all helpful. And it's all good to get a reset on some of that. And it's also good for, I think, the commission to have an understanding of what's coming down the pike, and get as much advance notice of that stuff as possible so that we can read it and comment meaningfully on it. Item 5A, Planning and Zoning Commission liaison reports. Do we have anyone here that was at either of the 3 July meetings?
I was here.
Go.
Yeah, so I was here for July 2nd, July 16, and July 23rd. The only items that would really kind of pertain in a way toward what P&Z does was there was an item on the consent agenda continuing the Great Homes effort that occurred. And then just honorable mention was this way the city stepped up and looked at some pay items for the city of Sugar Land to keep the best here. So I thought that was worth mentioning tonight. So that's it.
And I had the August 6th meeting. I don't believe there were any items pertinent to P&Z. I want to congratulate your dad on his retirement. And there was a ceremony for the new municipal judge. And there was a fascinating discussion of the necessity of traffic circles on Soldiers Field, which I enjoyed. Although as P&Z, I don't think we really have a dog in that hunt at this moment in time. And that's it for that meeting. Item 5B, city staff report.
Just a couple of things. So I think we've mentioned that your next meeting is August 22nd, which is next week. It's one of those months where we have a back-to-back meeting, week to week. So I'm really excited about that one. It's, as we've mentioned, it's the Urban 3 presentation that has been shown to a couple of other groups within the city. It's very impactful and really excited for y'all to get to hear a lot of great information as well. I think some of it was kind of showcased or highlighted today, but they're going to dig a little deeper, dive a little deeper into how that came about. So that's the 22nd. And then, as we mentioned, this is a series of workshops. So we really missed y'all. So we were just trying to find something to put on an agenda so we get to see your shining faces.
We can tell.
But we do have some things. There's some development activity also that from platting and things that are percolating. So we're excited to be bringing those forward to you as well. And we do anticipate before, or as part of those plat presentations, we'll do a little refresher on platting. It's been a while, been a minute since we've had some plats. So we'll provide a little refresher on that process as well. So look forward to seeing you in the next couple of months.
Thank you. Any other business? Got a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Brown, a second by Commissioner Landine. That passes. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Good night.